The most important thing for people to remove is the ultra-processed foods, and the signature ingredient of the ultra-processed foods are the refined carbohydrates and the refined vegetable oils. If all you do is that, you are going to experience tremendous health benefits. Please do not put flax seeds in your smoothie. This is the number one thing I can warn people against who are smoothie lovers. When flax seeds are damaged by blending or chewing, they release tiny quantities of cyanide.
Hey everyone, before diving into the episode, I want to take a moment to invite you into our mindbodygreen ecosystem, where you can explore the infinite possibilities of health and well-being. All you have to do is click the subscribe button to hear more thought-provoking interviews with leaders in the health space. I am so grateful for all of you who have tuned in over the years, and let me tell you, it's only going to get better. So what are the biggest misconceptions people have about quote-unquote brain foods?
Well, I think a lot of people think about brain food, like eating for their brain, as adding specific things to their diet that are going to bolster their brain health and protect their brain from things like depression and dementia. And we think of certain superfoods and supplements as being really important for brain health. So, things like, eating more berries or dark chocolate or red wine, those kinds of things. And not only do those strategies not work, but they actually can work against people because for two reasons. One is because they aren't effective, but worse than that, it's one thing to do something that's not effective, but the real problem, I think, with the superfood strategy is that it distracts people from what's actually important about brain food. The things that you can do to improve your brain health have nothing to do really, or very little to do with adding special things to the diet. They really have to do with subtracting the things from the diet that are working against your brain in the first place. That's a really powerful strategy. And now, of course, it's not as easy as adding things, and it doesn't feel as empowering or as positive as subtraction. Subtraction feels depriving and negative and difficult, but it is so much more effective. So I think that's one of the problems that I want to make sure people learn a little bit more about.
Just to be clear on this, because a lot of people are going to be upset that you mentioned berries, dark chocolate, and wine. We can still have those things. They're still good, but we just can't eat a standard American diet and expect the addition of those things make everything okay. They're still good, but we need to subtract things, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, for the most part. So we'll kind of take these three different examples because they are quite different from each other. So berries, for example, there's really nothing wrong with having berries in the diet. They are, unless you're sensitive to berries or have to keep your carbohydrate intake very, very low and can't have too many berries. But for the most part, berries are fine, and they're delicious. They're safe. I would, however, caution people against over consuming dark chocolate because there is quite a bit of sugar in dark chocolate. So we do need to be careful about sugar intake. And so I would say berries, I'd give a green light. I'd say chocolate, I'd give a yellow light. Be careful with over consuming chocolate. With red wine, I really would give a red light here. As a psychiatrist who's focusing on optimizing brain health, I really can't recommend red wine as a part of a healthy diet. It doesn't mean you can't include some, but it means that we can't put it in the same category as something that may have potential benefits or even be completely benign, because it does have risks. So, and each person's risk is different. You need to know, where you stand in terms of your ability to safely consume, moderate amounts of red wine.
Well, also, the subtitle of your book, you're talking about overcoming anxiety. And I believe in moderation with alcohol. And it's all about setting and context. Are you enjoying alcohol in moderation with friends, or are you enjoying moderation alcohol by yourself? I think there's a big difference. But I've never heard, to build off of your point, any medical professional who's in the nutritional psychiatry field prescribe alcohol for overcoming anxiety. We know. Whereas, berries, potentially some more, meats, fish, like that I hear a lot, but I hear you on the alcohol. And so what are some of the things, coming back to your larger point, we should be removing?
I think the most important thing for people to remove is the ultra processed foods, and the signature ingredient of the ultra processed foods are the refined carbohydrates and the refined vegetable oils, the seed oils or refined vegetable oils. So things like soybean oil and canola oil and so forth. So if all you do is that, and it is very difficult to do because these ingredients are in just about every prepared and processed food on the market. If all you do is that, you are going to experience tremendous health benefits because those two ingredients, refined carbohydrates and seed oils, are really powerful promoters of inflammation and oxidative stress, and even in the case of refined carbohydrates, insulin resistance, which robs the brain of energy. So these are some of the root causes, the really powerful contributing causes of mental health concerns in the first place. So removing those is the most important thing you can do.
So I think many people are coming around to the idea of removing ultra processed foods, and seed oils, I think, is picking up steam. Something else which you mentioned in the book that's linked to oxidative stress, which I still think we're early on, linoleic acid.
Mm.
Can you touch on that one? What is it? Why is it problematic? Where is it? What quantities are safe? Because it's kind of everywhere.
You're absolutely right. So, linoleic acid is a very fragile omega-6 fatty acid. So, there are omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. These are long chain fatty acids. They're very different from most of the fats that are in the diet. Anyway, it's a very fragile omega-6 fatty acid. And it's found in small quantities in both plant and animal foods, whole plant and animal foods, very small quantities. You have more of it in nuts and seeds, but you'll also find it in animal foods. So it's naturally present in small amounts in nature. So therefore we did evolve to consume small amounts of it. The problem, of course, is that over the past 100 years or so, we've developed the technology to extract the oils from seeds, sunflower seeds and cotton seeds and canola seeds, uh, all these different soybeans, which are also seeds of a certain type, and concentrate them and put them into bottles, and then they show up in mayonnaise and salad dressings and dairy-free baked goods, things like that. So they're now, and we fry potato chips in them. They're really everywhere. So now a huge percentage of our diet is vegetable oil, and the vegetable oils are very high, many of them, in linoleic acid. And the problem with linoleic acid is that it is very fragile, and it's very susceptible to what's called oxidative stress. So you can think of it almost as going rancid in the body very quickly, and then that sets off a chain reaction of oxidation of other molecules that are nearby. So you get a lot of toxic byproducts. So we are designed to see small amounts. We're not designed to be pouring concentrated linoleic acid, into our bodies 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. And the problem with that is that our fat cells really aren't designed to store linoleic acid in large quantities. And B, our brain doesn't really know what to do with linoleic acid when it sees it. So we end up, when we'll talk about the brain in particular, because I'm a psychiatrist, and you're right, the science is very, very early on this, is that linoleic acid does cross the brain just as easily as any other polyunsaturated fatty acid does. But then once it gets into the brain, it seems that the vast majority of it is burned for energy. And that's really not what the brain is supposed to be doing. The brain is not supposed to be burning fatty acids for energy. The brain is designed to burn small molecules like glucose and ketones for energy. When it burns linoleic acid or other fatty acids for energy, there's much more oxidative stress and inflammation, very damaging to the brain. So, and again, oxidative stress and inflammation, these are some of the very powerful contributing forces to damaging forces underlying mental health conditions. We really want to minimize that as much as we can.
So it's not necessarily the linoleic acid showing up in nuts. I'm having cashews or walnuts or peanuts or any of those nuts in nut butter form.
Exactly.
It's the linoleic acid in high concentration coming back to the seed oil, which is problematic. So, like, the memo to people here is don't worry about linoleic acid as it shows up naturally in the foods we're consuming. It's the seed oils again.
Absolutely. And that's why whole foods principles apply here. We don't want to worry about the naturally occurring fats in plant or animal foods. We want to worry about the unnaturally refined and concentrated. The same goes for carbohydrates too. There's no need necessarily to avoid carbohydrates in whole foods unless you have damage to your metabolism. You want to avoid the ultra refined concentrated carbohydrates and oils, which do not naturally exist in nature.
So you're a psychiatrist. Your book is about changing your diet and changing your mind. And you touched on ketones. And you did a study in, I believe, 2022 on the ketogenic diet for serious mental illness. Can you share what you did there? And
Yes, thank you for asking about that study. That was the work of my friend and colleague, Dr. Albert Donat. He's a psychiatrist in Toulouse, France, who's been practicing psychiatry for more than 35 years. A wonderful, wonderful man. And he really specializes in chronic mental illness, and many of the patients that he's worked with in many cases for decades. So he became interested in the ketogenic diet after witnessing a family member of his improve on a ketogenic diet and with respect to autism symptoms and epilepsy symptoms within just a matter of weeks. And so he thought to himself, this diet seems to be good for the brain. I wonder if this diet could help so many of my patients who are not responding to all of the interventions that I have been using to try to help them. Medication, psychotherapy, repeated hospitalizations. And so he invited 31 of his most treatment-resistant patients to volunteer to come into the hospital and try a ketogenic diet, a whole foods, very mildly ketogenic diet in the hospital under his supervision to see whether or not it would make any difference. And so 31 folks, and these were people with severe chronic treatment-resistant bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and major depression. And these were folks on average taking 5 psychiatric medications, not at all uncommon, and who had been ill in many cases for many, many years, on average about 10 years in treatment. And what he observed was really so remarkable that we decided to publish this together with the help of Dr. Eric Westman and Dr. Laura Soslow as well. We analyzed his work and published it last year. And what he observed was that of the 28 people who were able to stay on the diet for more than 2 weeks.
so that's 20 out of 31. That's pretty darn good.
28 out of 31. That's really good. Exactly. Only 3 of them stopped the diet, and there were no serious side effects. People tolerated the diet well. 28 people stayed on the diet, and within 3 weeks of starting the diet, everyone had improved, both psychiatrically and metabolically. And to the point that 44% of those patients achieved clinical remission from their so-called treatment-resistant chronic serious mental illness. Just unprecedented.
Wow.
Unbelievable, right? And so what this tells us is that there is hope. I mean, there are so many people out there who think they've tried everything. And this is regardless of diagnosis, regardless of duration of treatment, regardless of length of the illness, regardless of the medications they were taking, which types or how many, all of them improved. And not just a little bit. We're talking 7 to 10 times more robust improvement compared to medication studies for depression and psychotic symptoms.
Wow. So I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I want to say, maybe you know them, that SSRIs have like a 40% effective, 40, is it around that ballpark, right? Being effective. And is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, compared to placebo, about 10% better than placebo.
Look, I always want to let people know like SSRIs can also save people's lives, and I'm not against medication, but I think given you're talking about a flip of a coin, one out of two, what I think is really challenging here with SSRIs specifically is when people go on them and it doesn't work, they can quickly go to a really even worse place because then you start to lose hope because most people aren't aware that they're not as effective as popular culture tends to think. And so if you're looking at a diet intervention, which is just as effective, and it's, look, we believe in lifestyle modification first, you at least don't lose hope. Hey, I'll try this keto thing. I'll get to, have a lot more fat and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, I'll try something else, or maybe I'll try medication. Whereas if you go to the medication, I could see for someone who's already dealing with anxiety and depression and serious psychiatric, illness, it quickly goes to a dark place where there's no hope for me. What's your take on that?
Exactly, Jason. I'm so glad that you framed it that way because I practiced psychiatry for 25 years. For the first 10 years, I used medication and psychotherapy exclusively, like most psychiatrists do. And I still use medications and psychotherapy in my work, even to this day, even in my nutrition and metabolic practice. So there is a place for medications. Medications can be helpful for some people. And the people who are helped by them know who they are. If they don't work for you, though, I don't want you to lose hope. And if they've only helped you a little bit and you need more support, you can combine these dietary strategies, ketogenic diets, and other dietary strategies. I recommend a variety of different options for you to try in the book, not just keto. You can combine dietary strategies with medication. And there's no reason why you have to choose one or the other. But I think it's really important for people to know that these dietary interventions, in my experience as a clinical and in my clinical work, and also in the hands of Dr. Dana in France, these seem to work better for a lot of people than medications often do. And so it's really a powerful intervention.
So what does this say about the ketogenic diet? What is so good about the diet here? Is it the protein? Is it the fat? Or is it that it's correcting for metabolic syndrome or something? Like, is it the driver of what's driving these conditions, or is it the diet? Like, walk us through, like, how should this reframe how we think about our brain and mental health and the ketogenic diet, and what's the problem and what's the solution here?
Great. Thank you for asking that question. That's the $1,000,000 question. What is it about the ketogenic diet that makes it such a powerful intervention? And really, it's less about what's in the diet and more about how the body responds to the diet, meaning that there are lots of different ways you can construct a ketogenic diet, but the main purpose of a ketogenic diet, regardless of how many plants or animals are in it, or even how much fat is in it, or how much protein, the goal of a ketogenic diet is to lower insulin levels. So any way of eating that lowers insulin levels and puts you into ketosis is ketogenic. And this includes fasting and calorie restriction, not just high-fat diets. So when you lower your insulin levels, what happens is you turn fat burning on. And your body starts to use less carbohydrate for energy and more fat for energy, whether that fat comes from your food or from excess body fat. And when you start vigorously burning fat, the liver turns some of that fat, breaks some of that fat down into ketones, which are these very short pieces of fat. They're kind of pre-digested fat molecules that can cross easily into the brain and supplement brain energy. And the reason why that is so important is because most of us, unfortunately, now have insulin resistance, which means our brains are not burning glucose properly anymore. We can't burn glucose to full capacity anymore. We can't use glucose well enough to fully fuel our brains. So we need a supplemental fuel source. And ketones are absolutely the perfect supplemental fuel source for the brain.
So on that note, did these specific subjects in the study, were there any commonalities in their lab work? Did they all have high insulin? Like, what I'm trying to glean here is how does one understand that this diet may be effective? And if you're saying insulin's a driver here, because people are asking, you know what, I have anxiety, like let's give this a shot. Like, is there a way to look at someone's lab results and look like, okay, this is high, this is low, you're actually a good candidate, or is it everyone who struggles? Like, what is the? So I'll pause there. I know it's all throwing a lot at you.
Sure. No, this is great. It's exactly the right question to ask. So we don't yet know which people are going to be the best candidates for a ketogenic diet. However, a couple of things to know that are helpful. One is that all of the patients in Dr. Danan's study had at least one marker of poor metabolic function, meaning they had high blood sugar, or they were overweight, or they had high triglycerides or high blood pressure, things that are very commonly called, these are pieces of what are called metabolic syndrome, right? So metabolic dysfunction.
92% of America now.
Exactly. The vast majority of us now have at least one marker of metabolic dysfunction. Just as you said, everyone can benefit from lowering their insulin levels, right? So that's a good thing. But the other thing to say is that, so in my clinical work, I certainly work with patients who don't have any markers of metabolic dysfunction. I work with people who are very physically fit in some cases, who are lean and appear for all intents and purposes to be quite healthy. You measure their lab tests, everything looks fine. Some of them also benefit from a ketogenic diet, and we don't understand exactly why some people respond. We can't say for sure why it is that these people are responding, but we do know that the ketogenic diet has more than one benefit. So yes, it supplements brain energy, but it also lowers glucose levels. And if you're getting glucose spikes in your blood after you're eating, if you're eating too many refined carbohydrates, say, for example, and your glucose is going up after every meal before it comes back down, going up too high, every time you're getting a glucose spike in your bloodstream, you're also getting one in your brain. And those glucose spikes create damaging waves of inflammation and oxidative stress. So when you lower your glucose levels through a ketogenic diet, you're reducing those waves of you have less inflammation in the brain and less oxidative stress. So, and there are many other things that happen too. So neurotransmitters rebalance, et cetera. So multi-purpose tool.
So you mentioned glucose spikes, and you reference a study in the book about how sugar impacted teenage boys.
Yes.
Can you share that? That was a good one.
So parents out there of teenage boys, so these are healthy, by all intents and purposes, healthy teenage boys were chosen for this study, and they were given sugar sweetened cola or sugar-free cola. And then they measured their adrenaline levels as a stress hormone, followed their adrenaline levels after they had the two types of cola. And the boys who had the sugar-sweetened cola, their adrenaline levels spiked to 4 to 5 times baseline, 4 to 5 hours later. So it wasn't an immediate reaction. It was a delayed reaction, but a huge spike in adrenaline, the stress hormone. And there were symptoms that came along with this for these boys, feeling shaky and uncomfortable and those sort of things. People often will feel, kind of anxious and hangry and irritable and between meals, sometimes even feeling panicky and having panic attacks and feeling like they're hypoglycemic. In many cases, it's not because their blood sugar is dropping. It's because their adrenaline levels are spiking. And this is really not a subtle effect. This is a very, very powerful hormonal effect.
Boys have enough trouble sitting still and paying attention anyway, and then you put them on sugary sweet soda. It's a recipe for disaster.
That's an excellent way of putting it.
So bringing it back to food and eating, something else I thought was so interesting was your take on the Mediterranean diet. It's widely studied, I think, not really controversial, embraced, I think, to some degree. And I think most people would agree a lot healthier when compared to the standard American diet. But you point out it's got some flaws. Tell us more.
So it does. And first of all, I agree with everything you just said. There's a lot of science to support the Mediterranean diet as being a healthier diet, a clearly healthier diet than the standard American diet. And why that is anybody's guess. There are lots of differences between the Mediterranean diet and the standard American diet. One of which jumps out at me is that it's a lot lower in ultra processed foods. And so, study after study has shown that it is healthier for us. So, if that's the change you can make, please make it. However, I think we can do better, because the Mediterranean diet, just because it's better than the standard American diet for the brain and the rest of the body, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best diet for the brain. And there are many good reasons to believe that it's not, and just a couple of examples, which I put in the book. So one is that the foundation of the Mediterranean diet is grains and legumes. And some of them are highly refined in the forms of breads and pasta. And so not only is that a huge carbohydrate load for people with insulin resistance, which again, the majority of us now have, it's far too high in carbohydrate for the majority of us with insulin resistance. So that's thing number one. But thing number two is it sends a mixed message about refined carbohydrates. It really discourages certain types of refined carbohydrates like sugar, while explicitly encouraging others like flour. And the body really can't tell the difference between flour and sugar. So it sends a mixed message there. So too high in carbohydrate in general, but then also too high in refined carbohydrates, which I think are completely unnecessary and quite damaging. Another is that there is this explicit or implicit, depending on which study you look at, encouragement of alcohol, red wine in the diet as a brain healthy practice and body healthy practice. There's absolutely no scientific evidence to support that, and lots of evidence against it. And the other problem with basing the diet on grains and legumes is that these are very nutrient poor foods. They're very low in nutrients, and they're very high in anti-nutrients that interfere with our ability to nourish our brains. So I think we can do better than the Mediterranean diet if we're looking for optimal brain health.
I'll spend a moment on alcohol. My view on this is, and I'll build off what I said earlier, that it's context, it's setting. Are you drinking alcohol solo, or are you enjoying alcohol with friends and celebrating? I view alcohol almost as like the Trojan horse for a social connection. And we know that social connection is incredibly powerful in terms of longevity. There's all sorts of, and like we know, coming out of the pandemic, and loneliness and what that does to our well-being. I know that's a stretch. I don't know if there's a study that will ever support that the alcohol solo versus alcohol in a social setting. But that is my take of the Mediterranean diet. These people are eating with their family and drinking with their family and friends, and they're not sitting at home in the dark, doom scrolling, drinking by themselves.
I agree that it's context dependent, and that alcohol can be enjoyed at low levels by people for whom it's not a problem.
100%.
Right? I completely agree with you on that.
I would say that if you don't drink, don't start. And if you don't like alcohol, so like, I'm not encouraging people to have, I'll be clear, like 4 to 5 drinks. But if you enjoy a glass of wine with family and friends, or beer or whatever it may be, have at it.
Right. So it's context dependent and it's person dependent. So, and I love what you said. If you don't drink now, don't start, because there are no health benefits. There are no physical health benefits, only risks. So, but as a psychiatrist who has just written a book about optimizing brain health, really, I'm trying to reach people who are struggling, right? So if you have depression, insomnia, anxiety, attention problems, memory problems, and you're going to come to me, I'm not going to prescribe alcohol.
100%.
So, and for this reason, alcohol is a powerful promoter of oxidative stress and inflammation. And it's also it's 100% guaranteed to disrupt your sleep quality. You will not sleep well for the second half of the night. And it is very addictive for a lot of people. So, and it can cause depression, anxiety, etc., withdrawal symptoms the next day, difficulty concentrating, and very, very poor sleep for the second half of the night. And of course, it's quite addictive. So, if you are struggling with your mental health, please at least look at the alcohol, the role of alcohol in your life, and give it a try. Give it a try 30 days without alcohol to see how it affects you. And if you don't notice any problems for yourself, then you can make that informed choice, right? But what I don't want people to think is that red wine is a brain healthy beverage. It's just not.
Agreed. I was just trying to make the point about the importance of social connection and alcohol part of that and why it's potentially beneficial. But we'll move on. So the larger point around anxiety. How does one construct a diet around anxiety? Like, are there, you say there are no silver bullet superfoods? What are some of the top things if someone is taking inventory of their cabinet, their fridge, they should remove immediately? And what are some of the top things they should add immediately?
Yeah, so it's mostly, again, about removal, subtraction. Again, the refined carbohydrates should be a major focus for people with anxiety because of that hormonal roller coaster we were talking about before. So when you eat too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often, you will get an exaggerated glucose spike in the bloodstream and then an exaggerated insulin spike in the bloodstream to squirrel away that excess glucose into your cells. And there's that piece. But then, as you were discussing before, there's a hormonal reaction to that pattern. So that goes beyond the glucose and insulin spike. And the reason for that is that, you might think, well, okay, so glucose goes up, it goes up briefly, depending on who you are. It might go up for a few hours. It might go up it depends on your metabolism. But it eventually comes back down because insulin is there, insulin to the rescue, comes into the bloodstream, brings the glucose back down to normal. So why should that be a problem for anxiety? The problem is that insulin is not just a blood sugar regulator. It is a master growth hormone. So it is talking to all of the other hormones in the body, the stress hormones, the reproductive hormones, the blood pressure regulating hormones, the appetite hormones. All of those hormones are being put on a roller coaster along with your glucose and insulin levels. And that's why you see that adrenaline spike 4 to 5 hours later. The body is responding to insulin. Just like I used the example in the book or the analogy in the book of musicians in an orchestra following an orchestra's baton. Like the insulin is telling all of your hormones what to do. So if you can get off that roller coaster by lowering your glucose and insulin levels, and the most powerful way you can do that, most effective way, step one, is get the refined carbohydrates out of your diet. Because those are the things that spike glucose and insulin the most. That might be all you need to do. You might not need to go to a low-carb diet or ketogenic diet. It depends on who you are.
So we're removing the processed foods. And a quote I loved from you in the book is, the truth about brain food is that meat is not dangerous. Vegan diets are not healthier. And antioxidants are not the answer. Now, we touched on antioxidants, but we really haven't talked about meat. Let's talk about meat.
Okay, so meat, has been accused of causing every health problem one can imagine. Cancer, constipation, obesity, type 2 diabetes, gout, you name it. High blood pressure. It has really been it's really been vilified. But when you actually look at the science, there is no evidence that meat is bad for us. And I spent an entire chapter backing that up and explaining to people what the science actually does show about meat. And I think I hope that when people read that chapter, they will see that all of the arguments against meat are basically just paper tigers. There really is no evidence to support. And it wouldn't make any sense that it would be bad for you because this is a natural whole food that we've been eating since time immemorial. It wouldn't make any sense to blame modern health epidemics. I mean, these are diseases, things like obesity and type 2 diabetes and heart disease were far less common even 100 years ago than they are now. So it wouldn't make any sense to blame a new disease epidemic or new epidemic of diseases on an ancient food. So that's it and a very nutritious and safe, easy to digest and highly nutritious food as well. So it really doesn't make any sense, but there's so much in the media and headlines and even built into our dietary guidelines telling us that meat is bad for us that we have, most of us, come to believe it. And I think it's really, really important to take those arguments down, because a diet without any animal foods is a very dangerous diet, especially for pregnant women.
Well, high quality meat is very nutrient dense. There's no argument there. I think what I would add is I would encourage everyone to do some basic lab work and getting understanding of, are they better with leaner cuts of meat? Or, is sat fat a problem? But I think that the underlying, issue you're touching on with a lot of the science is cholesterol and the theory there of how we view cholesterol. I think there's now consensus that ApoB is the most important marker there, and it's not necessarily total cholesterol, but encouraging people to do some basic blood work. And whether it's a little meat or a lot of meat, meat's probably an important component of one's diet.
It's really important if you're looking for optimal brain health and optimal total health, you do need to include some animal foods in the diet. And I recommend non-dairy animal foods if you can manage that. There's a chapter in the book about that. But it doesn't need to be, like you said, it doesn't need to be a lot of meat, and it doesn't need to be red meat. It can be seafood. It can be shellfish. It can be poultry. It can be, for example, duck is a red meat that's not, because it doesn't come from a mammal. Shellfish are very nutrient dense. So it doesn't, and eggs are a fantastic source of almost every nutrient we need. So it doesn't need to be red meat. And I think that's really important for people to know.
Personally, I'm a big fan of smash: salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. Nutrient dense. I think there's consensus there. I don't know anyone in their right mind who says don't eat any of those foods. High in protein, fat, like nutrient dense.
And a beautiful source of omega-3 fatty acids, the kinds that we can actually use, as opposed to the omega-3 fatty acids that are found in plants, which we have a very, very difficult time, if not impossible time, utilizing.
I'm seeing a lot more from experts on anti-nutrients like phytic acid, which can be found in some plants and nuts. And what's your take on quote unquote anti-nutrients and how it potentially affects our ability to absorb certain nutrients, which are critical to our brain health?
Yeah, so this is, one of the little known secrets about nutrition science is that just because a food contains a nutrient doesn't necessarily mean we can access it. And so if you look at the ingredient label on, nuts or seeds or flour for that, wheat, grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, if you look at the nutrient label, you may see minerals listed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can access them fully. And because of these anti-nutrients that exist in the seed foods. So there's a whole chapter in the book about how amazing seeds are and how clever they are in terms of guarding their nutrients for the future generations of the plant kingdom. It makes it a lot different. They really go out of their way to make it difficult for us to access those nutrients because they really are not there for us. They're there for the baby plant when it's ready to sprout. So it can be much harder for us to access nutrients from plant foods. And I think, there are special ways you can, that are traditional ways of processing seed foods, things like legumes and grains, and to get more nutrients out of them. So, things like cooking and sprouting and fermenting can reduce a lot of these, the anti-nutrient can offset a lot of those anti-nutrient benefits, anti-nutrient risks, and make the foods more nutritious. So, and that's the thinking behind traditional processing methods. I just think it's important for people, especially people who choose to get most of their protein from foods like nuts and legumes. Just be aware, be aware of these anti-nutrients and learn how to try to work around them as best you can, so that you're getting all the nutrients you need.
So what are some of the ones we should watch out for in terms of whole foods in the nut category or seed category, we should be aware of the anti-nutrients, and is there a certain amount where it becomes problematic? For example, if I have a handful of walnuts, or I'll use almonds, if I have a handful of almonds versus, a quart of almonds, or I drink a quart of almond milk, like, is there, or is it all compromising our ability to absorb the nutrients? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the quantity will matter, and so there are a couple of things to think about there. One is that if you are turning to those foods as your primary source of things like protein and minerals, and then you're going to need a higher amount of those foods to meet your nutrient needs because of the anti-nutrient effect. But the other is that if you are eating a mixed diet that includes some animal foods that let's use iron as an example, or zinc, iron and zinc, because iron and zinc, you'll see those listed in the seed foods, but it's very difficult for us to get at the iron and zinc in seed foods because of these anti-nutrients, particularly phytic acid, but there are others as well. So if you're eating a mixed diet, so I give an example in the book of this lovely experiment that was done a long time ago, of somebody eating oysters. Like, let's say that you eat a mixed diet that includes animal foods, and you're trying to get, and you're looking for zinc. Oysters are the food on earth that is highest in zinc, richest in zinc. So if you eat oysters by themselves, you will see a very nice rise in blood zinc levels after you eat the oysters, signifying that you have absorbed a lot of the zinc from those oysters. If you eat that same amount of oysters with black beans, you absorb about half of the zinc from those oysters. And if you eat the same amount of oysters with corn tortillas, you absorb virtually none of the zinc from those oysters. So it's a very powerful effect.
Wow. So let's food combining. Let's talk about that. Because I think many people do, I'll have wild salmon with beans. So what happens? What am I losing in that salmon if I combine the two?
Yeah, so you are losing access to some of the iron and zinc. So phytic acid interferes with iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium.
Because there's some big ones.
Those are really big. They're really, really important, all four of them.
Phytic acid is what's problematic for absorption of those, I think, four minerals you meant: iron, magnesium, zinc, and
Yes, those are the major minerals that get interfered with by phytic acid. But there are also other types of anti-nutrients in the seed foods. Things like tannins, that go beyond seed foods. So a lot of the seed foods contain tannins, which interfere with iron absorption. But tannins you can also find in tea and berries, so a wide variety of plant foods contain tannins and other types of anti-nutrients. So, we think of plant foods as teeming with vitamins and minerals, but and some of them do contain quite a few nutrients, but none of them is any match for an animal food for two reasons. One is they contain fewer nutrients to begin with, and second is they contain anti-nutrients, which animal foods do not, by and large, contain.
my take is most people are omnivores, and they do a lot of food combining. They're going to have their animal or seafood for their main protein source, and then they're going to have a side of something, whether it's beans or maybe not after the show. Or so I want to get a sense of, or they make smoothies. And so I think my take, and I put myself in this camp, that there are a lot of healthy, smart people who think they're doing all the right things here and are potentially adding some of these foods that are rich in anti-nutrients that are doing a little bit of their unintended consequences. I'll leave it at that. So what are some of it? We touched on, like, what are some of those foods that people are, everyone get out their notepads, that we should, because, that I'm putting in my smoothie, or we got the memo on beans with a protein. If you're going to have beans, you almost separate it, have it as a snack, like have it alone if you want beans. But if you combine it with a protein, and that protein is your source of those four minerals, you got a problem. You're better off separating the meal. Like, let's talk about that.
Great.
Because I've had this problem, and other people have too.
Yeah. So what I do in the book is the final quarter of the book is is practical suggestions about how to get more out of your diet, how to, make any diet brain healthier, regardless of your dietary preferences, right? So I like to say, I'm nutritionally pro-choice. I just want you to have the right information before you make those choices, right? So I actually recommend in the book that everybody, unless you prefer a vegan diet, in which case, please do not do this. I recommend that everybody in the book think twice about including grains and legumes in their diet, period. And really, if you're eating some animal food, even if it's just eggs or shellfish, whatever it is, if you're eating some animal food, there's no need to include legumes in your diet and lots of reasons not to. And grains are provide almost no nutritional benefits whatsoever. They're really just a source of carbohydrate. They're so nutrient poor that there really is no reason to eat grains, even for vegans to consume grains. So if you're looking for protein, and you will need legumes and nuts. If you're not eating animal foods, you will need legumes and nuts in your diet to meet your protein needs. So please do not remove them if you prefer that way of eating. But for everyone else, there really is no good argument for including grains and legumes in the diet.
So if I'm making a smoothie, which I do every day, and many of our listeners do, and I'm putting in our grass-fed whey and putting in an avocado, but then I think about vegetables and fruits. What should I put in? If I want to get a vegetable in my smoothie and I want to get a fruit in my smoothie, what should we put in? What should we absolutely not put in there if we want to get the maximum benefit?
Please do not put flax seeds in your smoothie. This is the number one thing I can warn people against who are smoothie lovers. Flax seeds contain, when flax seeds are damaged by blending or chewing, they release tiny quantities of cyanide, which is a neurotoxin. It poisons your mitochondria and interferes with your mitochondria's ability to generate energy for the brain and the rest of the body. Please do not put flax seeds in your smoothie. There's no reason to include them and every reason to eliminate them. And again, we're looking for optimal brain health here. So that's what we're talking about. Please also do not make your smoothie with sugar or fruit juice, because that's going to give you a big glucose and insulin spike that's going to undo whatever benefits you're trying to get out of that smoothie. So please do not sweeten your smoothie with sugar or fruit juice. What you put in it beyond that is really up to you in terms of what you enjoy, what fruits and vegetables you enjoy. And so I'm more, again, sort of emphasizing the benefits of subtraction than addition, if you're noticing. So it's less about what you put in and what you don't than what you take out.
But I'm thinking about the nutrient absorption piece. I don't want to put something in my smoothie. If I'm looking at that smoothie to optimize for nutrients, and this ladders up to brain health, like you want the right nutrients. I don't want to put something in there that's high in phytic acid, because that's going to hurt my nutrient absorption. So peanuts, peanut butter off the table. What I want to get on are like, are there specific vegetables, fruits, or nuts that if we want to optimize for nutrient absorption, we should probably, I'm not saying take it out of your diet. I'm saying you probably shouldn't put it in your smoothie. Like if you want a handful of nuts, maybe you should have it in the mid-afternoon, but don't put it in your smoothie. So what are those? Because either vegetable, fruits, and nuts and seeds.
The foods that are that are rich in phytic acid are the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. So if you're trying to maximize your mineral absorption of magnesium, zinc, iron, calcium from your smoothie, you really want to keep all the nuts and seeds and grains and legumes out of the smoothie. Most people aren't putting grains and legumes in their smoothies, but some people are putting nuts and seeds in there. So I would definitely, if phytic acid is your concern, I would not put those in the smoothie.
So then it would make the case for, if you like a milk-based smoothie, either having a whole milk or an oat milk that's clean with no sugar, instead of an almond milk or a cashew milk.
Well, yeah, so oats are also a grain. And so we run into that same issue. And also most oat milk, and please be careful about this, most oat milk contains vegetable oil as well. So look for ones that do not contain vegetable oil.
Malk is a fantastic brand where it's just the ingredients like oats and Himalayan sea salt. And I think that's it.
Yes, exactly. So if you're using grain milks or other types of milk substitutes, it sounds like your listeners probably already know this. No sugar, no vegetable oil in those milks, please.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's helpful. I think this is important because food, I think most people food combine. And if most people are looking to optimize, like myself, you don't want to, we're not demonizing beans or legumes specifically, but you maybe shouldn't combine it with a rich source of iron if you're concerned about iron deficiency or anemia. You should probably have the beans as a snack.
Exactly. Exactly.
Got it. So I'm curious to close. Tell me about like what's a day in the life for you in terms of what you eat for brain health. Can you walk us through like your breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks? Let's close there.
Keep in mind, this is my diet that I choose for myself. And this is not, I'm not advocating that everybody eat exactly the way I do. And I have my own food sensitivities and issues and my own metabolic issues to deal with. So this is not, so it's just me. So I eat, my diet is almost entirely animal foods, non-dairy animal foods. So, and I do eat a few plant foods, but the ones that happen to agree with me. But I mostly eat animal foods. So this includes, some of my favorite foods: duck, shellfish, seafood, steak, chicken, turkey, and I do eat some plant foods, things like cucumbers and olives and lettuce and avocados. And I eat certain plant foods that agree with me. I don't eat any nuts or seeds or grains or legumes or dairy products. Or even, unfortunately, I'm sensitive to eggs, or I would include those, but because they're quite good for you, but I don't tolerate them.
Is there a specific type of lettuce, romaine, butter? Let's go deep. Tell me your preferred lettuce.
Any lettuce that's a true lettuce as opposed to a cruciferous green. So the cruciferous greens I don't tolerate well, and so the things like baby kale or radicchio, those kinds of things, those kind of arugula, I don't do well with those, but I do any true lettuce will do.
Got it. I love arugula.
Oh yeah, no, my partner does too.
We covered a lot of ground other than everyone pick up the book. I'll hold it up, change your diet, change your mind. Anything else we haven't touched on that you'd like to touch on or leave our audience with any words of wisdom to close?
Like really, for anyone who's listening who has a mental health issue of any kind, whether it's major or minor, whether it's kind of an everyday issue like irritability or anxiety, worry, stress, difficulty sleeping, concentration problems, all the way to people with serious mental illness, I just want everybody to know that there's so much you can do to improve your mental health that you may not have tried yet. And there are really 3 principles that I lay out in the book: nourish, protect, and energize. Your brain needs all the nutrients, so the book lays out which foods are best at delivering those nutrients. The book tells you, which foods to avoid to protect your brain from damage. And the third is how to energize your brain for a lifetime, keep that energy flow going. And that's all about controlling your glucose and insulin levels. Whether you eat plants or animals doesn't matter. You want to focus on your glucose and insulin levels, get those into a healthy range. If you do those 3 things, you will really be optimizing your brain nutrition, and it just takes a few weeks to feel better. So I hope people will try some of these approaches.
Well, it's a fantastic resource for anyone interested in a nutrition-based lifestyle intervention. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Georgia.
Thank you so much for reading it and for sharing it with your listeners. I'm really happy to have been here. Thank you.